Well, guys, believe it or not, we're going to finish up the Civil War in our textbook today. We'll still learn a few more things about it tomorrow. But if you would get your textbook out and open it up to page 189. 189 is where we're going to be today. If you would open it up for me, please, and follow along. And we start here on this page with this title here, The War Winds Down. In other words, it's coming to an end. Let's look at this painting here. This painting from 1891 imagines a key scene from the Battle of Franklin in Tennessee. The result was one of the Confederacy's worst defeats of the war. It looks like, who's got the high ground here? It looks like the Union Army's up on the high ground, and the Confederates are trying to charge up the hill. That never works well. Whoever's on the high ground almost always wins the battle. As 1864 wore on, President Lincoln sent General Grant to attack General Lee's forces in Virginia. Meanwhile, the war raged on in the South. Union General William T. Sherman captured Atlanta in September, then Savannah, Georgia, just before Christmas. Across the South, the land lay in ruins. These battles brought on even more killing in a war that was already bloody enough. A few months later, President Lincoln started his second term. Lincoln's new vice president was Andrew Johnson, a Tennessee senator and one of the few Southern Democrats to remain loyal to the Union. So for 4 years, Abraham Lincoln's been president, and for 4 years, he's had to fight the Civil War as the president. Now he's starting his 5th year as president. Confederate losses mount. As 1865 began, it was clear the end of the war was near. The Confederate Army had lost huge numbers to injury and disease. The remaining soldiers were worn down, hungry, and tired. The Union kept moving into Confederate lands. The Confederate government became so desperate that it began calling on slaves to fight. Can you imagine that? Do you think those slaves are going to help the Confederates fight? The ones that are have made them slaves? You think they want to help them win a war? I doubt it. Page 190. Lee surrenders. Wow. After the horrible bloodshed of the Wilderness Campaign, Grant finally began to gain ground on Lee. The Union lost just under 60,000 soldiers in the campaign, which was almost equal to the original number of Lee's entire army. Many Northerners were shocked at the losses, but Grant's strategy was working. By the beginning of 1865, Lee's army was exhausted, and no more troops were coming. His supply lines were cut in early April. On April 9th, in a farmhouse in the town of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. Here's a painting of it right here. This painting, made in 2001, shows the meeting of Lee and Grant in a private home in the town of Appomattox Courthouse. I used to think they met in a courthouse, but that's the whole name of the town. Can you imagine your town being named Appomattox Courthouse? That's the name of the town. They met in a private home. According to Grant's memoirs, the two men talked pleasantly for over an hour before discussing the surrender. These two generals, these two powerful men, General Lee, the Confederate general, General Grant, the Union general, met and were able to sit down and chat for a little while before General Lee surrenders, ending the Civil War. The North wins. So good for Abraham Lincoln, right? He's finally going to be president, and not during a time of war. His goal is to save the Union, and the North has defeated the South. The Union's going to be saved, we hope. Slavery's going to end. So everything's going great for Abraham Lincoln until we look at page 191, and something very sad happens. An assassin kills President Lincoln. Shortly after the war ended, President Lincoln and his wife attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. While they were watching from the balcony, John Wilkes Booth, a supporter of the Confederacy, shot the president in the head. Booth then leapt from the balcony onto the stage. He broke his leg, but still managed to get away. He was later found and killed. Booth had not acted alone. That same night, another man tried to kill Secretary of State William Seward at his home. Someone else was meant to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, but he lost his nerve at the last minute. President Lincoln died only a few hours after he was shot, becoming the first U.S. president to be assassinated. The nation was shocked and heartbroken by the death of their great leader. They also worried and wondered how the country would come together again. That difficult task fell to Vice President, the guy from Tennessee, Andrew Johnson, a Democrat. He became the new president a few hours after Lincoln died. Andrew Johnson, from not far from here at all, is where he's from in Greenville. And so right out here in front of the school, and our school that we go to is Andrew Johnson Highway, named after Andrew Johnson. He's the man from Tennessee going to become the next president after Abraham Lincoln. He's got a hard job ahead of him for sure. The cost of war. At the war's end, Americans, North and South, looked about in a daze at the death that surrounded them. In just 4 years, 620,000 people. Now you remember, guys, Neyland Stadium, all those people watching UT play football, it's about 100,000 people. This is more than six Neyland stadiums full of people died during the war. That's how much that is. Some historians estimate that the number of deaths might be as high as 750,000. That'd be 7 Neyland stadiums full. The Civil War is still the most deadliest war that the United States has ever fought. More people died in the Civil War than all other American wars combined. In the South, where the population was smaller, the loss was overwhelming. 1 in 5 Southern men of fighting age, from 20 to 50, did not make it through the war years alive. Women and children were left alone with little or no protection. Towns had been destroyed. Bridges were broken down. Railroads could no longer be used. Farmers who'd been fighting in the war came home to fields that had been left untended for more than 3 years. Much of the South was in ruins. The war brought big changes to wealthy planters. Many of them lost almost everything. Their plantations were burned, their slaves were freed, and their food and livestock stolen. The blockade had meant they could no longer export their cotton. To make things worse, the money that they had was Confederate money. After the war, it was not worth anything. So the cost of war was high, especially for the South. Look at this picture right here. Quickly dug cemeteries like this one next to a hospital near Richmond, Virginia, popped up by the thousands during the war. Why do you think only some of the graves in this graveyard have markers? I guess, you see, these over here have markers where they put their names and these don't. Maybe they don't even know who these people were. Maybe they were soldiers who they weren't really sure who they were. That happened a lot. And, you know, if they're in Richmond, Virginia fighting and they're from, let's say Georgia, far away, their family wouldn't even know they were dead until they didn't come home. That happened a lot too. Another sad cost of the war. All right. Well, you've got some questions from this text today in your book. So make sure you go back if you need to page 189 through 192 and answer these 5 questions. We'll learn some more about the end of the war tomorrow. See you then.